You ever feel like you've climbed the highest mountain, worked your fingers to the bone until they bled, and finally reached the peak, only to find out someone still thinks you belong in the dirt at the bottom? It's a heavy feeling. Man, it's like a weight in your chest that never quite goes away. No matter how many zeros are in your bank account, or how many people report to you at the office, success is supposed to be this great equalizer, right? They tell you that if you work hard, play by the rules, and make something of yourself, the world will finally see you for who you are. But sometimes, the world only sees what it wants to see. Before I dive into this, I want to know who I'm talking to today. Where are you guys watching this from? Drop your city, your state, or your country in the comments. I need to know who's rocking with me in this moment. And if you've ever been in a room where you felt like an invisible wall was standing between you and the respect you deserved, hit that subscribe button. We're building a community here, and I want you to be a part of it. We've got to stick together, especially when the world tries to push us apart. Let me set the scene for you. This happened a few months back. I was headed from Los Angeles to New York. It was one of those high-stakes trips. I'm talking about a billion-dollar merger, the kind of deal that keeps you up at night staring at the ceiling, running numbers through your head until your brain feels like it's going to short-circuit. I've been the CEO of my logistics firm for over a decade now. I built it from a single van and a dream to a national powerhouse. I've sat in boardrooms with some of the most powerful people in this country. I've handled crises that would make most men fold. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepares you for the quiet, cold sting of being told you don't belong without a single word being spoken. That morning, I felt good. You know that feeling when you catch your reflection and you think, yeah, I've come a long way. I was wearing a midnight blue Italian wool suit, bespoke, tailored to the inch. It's like a second skin. My armor. But in my hand, I was carrying this old, battered leather briefcase. It's scuffed at the corners. The handle is worn smooth, and the brass latch is a little temperamental. My team keeps telling me to get a new one, something sleek and modern, maybe a Rimowa or a Toomey. But I can't let it go. That briefcase belonged to my father. He was a man who spent 40 years working in a factory, coming home with grease under his fingernails and a back that ached every time he sat down. To me, that bag smells like his work boots and his sacrifice. It reminds me that I didn't just pop out of a vacuum. I'm the result of generations of people who weren't allowed to sit in the rooms I now run. I walked into LAX, and the energy was buzzing. You know that LA heat. Even early in the morning, it sticks to you. I checked in at the private terminal, breezed through security, and made my way to the first-class lounge. I wanted a moment of peace before the chaos of New York. I sat there with a black coffee, looking at the planes taking off, thinking about the presentation I had to give. I was focused. I was in my zone. I felt like the man I had worked 30 years to become. When they called for boarding, I stood up, straightened my tie, and headed for the jet bridge. I was one of the first people in line. I always fly first class on these long hauls. It's not about the status. Honestly, it's about the space. I'm a big guy, 6'3", broad shoulders. I need the room to think, to stretch out, and to breathe. Plus, at my age, my knees don't appreciate being packed into coach like a sardine in a tin can. As I stepped onto the plane, I was met with that blast of recycled, chilled air and the faint scent of expensive upholstery and cleaning fluid. I walked toward the front of the cabin, looking for seat 1A. Standing right there, at the entrance to the first-class section, was the lead flight attendant. Let's call her Sarah. She was perfectly put together, hair in a tight, blonde bun, uniform without a single wrinkle, a professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Right in front of me was a white gentleman, maybe in his 60s, wearing a golf polo and some khakis. Sarah beamed at him. "Welcome back, Mr. Henderson. So good to see you again. Your usual seat is ready for you." She didn't even look at his ticket. She just knew him. Or maybe she just knew he belonged there. He nodded, gave a little half wave, and strolled to his seat. Then it was my turn. I stepped forward, my briefcase in one hand and my phone with the digital boarding pass in the other. I gave her a polite nod, the kind of professional courtesy I give everyone. "Good morning," I said. My voice is deep, resonant. People usually listen when I speak. The smile on Sarah's face didn't just fade, it vanished. It was like someone flipped a switch and the lights went out. She looked at me. Then she looked down at my briefcase. Then she looked back at me. There was this long, heavy silence, the kind of silence that feels like it's pressing against your eardrums. "Ticket?" she asked. Her voice was flat. No good morning. No welcome aboard. Just a one-word demand. I held up my phone. 1A, I said, keeping my tone steady. She didn't just glance at it. She reached out, took my phone from my hand, which is a huge no-no in my book, and pulled it closer to her face. She squinted at the screen like she was looking for a forgery. Then she looked at my face, comparing the name on the digital pass to the man standing in front of her. "I'm going to need to see a physical ID, sir," she said. "Now, I've flown 1,000,000 miles. I'm a Diamond Medallion member. I've walked onto hundreds of planes. Not once, in the last 5 years, has a flight attendant asked to see my ID at the door of the aircraft. That's what the TSA is for. That's what the gate agent is for. Once you're on the plane, you're a passenger." I felt that first little spark of heat in my chest. You know the one. It starts low, near the stomach, and it travels up. It's not anger. Not yet. It's a mix of disbelief and that old, familiar exhaustion. It's the here we go again feeling. "Is there a problem?" I asked, my voice dropping an octave. I wasn't being aggressive, but I wanted her to know I wasn't a child she could boss around. She didn't answer. She just stood there, blocking the aisle. Behind me, I could hear the other passengers starting to shuffle, the quiet murmurs of people wanting to get to their seats. I could feel their eyes on my back. I could feel the judgment, even if it wasn't there. When you're a black man in a space like that, you're always hyper-aware of how you're being perceived. If I raise my voice, I'm the angry black man. If I complain, I'm difficult. So I did what I always do. I kept my cool. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my wallet, and showed her my driver's license. She took it, turned it over, and actually held it up to the light. I'm not kidding. She held it up like she was checking for a watermark on a $20 bill. I stood there, 230 pounds of CEO in a $3,000 suit, being treated like a teenager, trying to sneak into a club with a fake ID. Finally, she handed it back. No apology. No thank you. She just stepped aside, her movements stiff and reluctant. "Fine," she muttered. "Seat 1A is on the left." I didn't say a word. I just walked past her, but as I did, I felt the air around her. It was cold. It wasn't just the air conditioning, it was a vibe. It was a you don't fit the profile energy. I made my way to my seat, tucked my father's briefcase under the ottoman, and sat down. The leather of the seat was soft. The legroom was ample, and the window looked out over the tarmac where the sun was starting to shimmer off the ground. By all accounts, I should have been relaxing. I had a long flight ahead of me, a big deal to close, and a comfortable seat. But that interaction with Sarah was stuck in my throat like a piece of dry toast. I tried to shake it off. I opened my laptop, pulled up my spreadsheets, and tried to lose myself in the data. I told myself she was just having a bad day. Maybe she was tired. Maybe she had a rough morning at home. I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt, because that's the burden we carry. We make excuses for other people's prejudice, so we don't have to carry the anger ourselves. But then, the rest of the first-class cabin started to fill up. I watched Sarah interact with the others. A young woman in yoga pants, a guy in a hoodie who looked like he worked in tech, an older couple who were clearly on vacation. She was a different person with them. She was charming. She was bubbly. She was helpful. She laughed at their jokes and offered to hang their coats before they even asked. When she walked past my row, she didn't even turn her head. It was like seat 1A was empty. It was like I had become part of the furniture. I sat there, staring at my computer screen. But the numbers weren't making sense anymore. I could feel the silence from her every time she moved through the cabin. It was a loud, ringing silence. I looked down at my hands, my dark, weathered hands resting on the keyboard, and then I looked at the pristine white sleeve of my shirt. I thought about how much I had to do to get here. I thought about the late nights, the sacrifices, the times I was told no before I finally got a yes. I realized then that this flight wasn't going to be about the merger. It wasn't going to be about the billion-dollar deal. There was a different kind of tension building in that cabin, something much older and much deeper than a business contract. I felt a bead of sweat roll down the back of my neck, despite the cold air blowing from the vent above me. I looked up and saw Sarah at the front of the cabin, whispering something to another flight attendant while looking straight at me. She didn't realize I was watching. Her expression wasn't professional anymore. It was something else. It was disdain. I closed my laptop slowly, the click of the lid sounding like a gunshot in the quiet cabin. I leaned back and gripped the armrests, my knuckles turning a shade lighter as I braced myself for whatever was coming next. The vibration of the jet engines began to hum through the floorboards, a low-frequency thrum that I felt in the soles of my shoes and all the way up my spine. It was a familiar sensation, one that usually signaled the start of a productive few hours. But today, that hum felt like a warning bell. The plane began its slow, heavy crawl away from the gate, and I kept my hands clamped onto those leather armrests, my fingers tracing the stitching. I wasn't afraid of flying. I've spent half my life in the air. But I was bracing for the turbulence I knew was already happening inside this cabin. Long before we even hit a cloud, I looked out the window as the terminal faded away. And for a second, I wasn't a CEO in first class. I was a 10-year-old boy again, sitting on a wooden crate in my father's garage, watching him polish his one good pair of dress shoes. My father was a man of few words, but when he spoke, the world seemed to tilt on its axis just to listen. He'd look at me, his eyes tired but sharp, and say, "Son, listen to me. In this world, they're going to see your skin long before they ever hear your name. You have to be twice as good just to get half as far. You keep your head up, you keep your shirt pressed, and you never give them an excuse to look down on you." That memory hit me like a physical blow. I looked down at my suit, at the expensive fabric that was supposed to be my shield, and I realized that to Sarah, the flight attendant, it didn't matter. To her, I wasn't the man who provided jobs for 500 families. I wasn't the man who had just donated a wing to a community library. I was just a disruption. I was an error in her narrow vision of how the world was supposed to work. The plane taxied to the runway, the engines roaring to life as we prepared for takeoff. The G-force pressed me back into my seat, and I closed my eyes, trying to breathe through the tightness in my chest. It wasn't just the altitude. It was the suffocating weight of being watched. I could feel Sarah's eyes on me from her jump seat near the galley. It wasn't a look of service or care. It was the look a hawk gives a mouse, waiting for it to make a wrong move so it can strike. Once we reached cruising altitude and the fasten seatbelt sign dinged off, the cabin settled into that expensive, hushed rhythm. You know the sound, the soft click of overhead bins, the rustle of newspapers, the distant clinking of glassware in the galley. It's a sound that usually means comfort, but to me, it felt like the quiet before a storm. The drink service started. This is the part of the flight where the first-class experience is supposed to shine. Sarah came down the aisle with her silver cart, a forced, porcelain smile plastered on her face as she approached row 1B. That was the white gentleman I'd seen earlier, the one she'd greeted like an old friend. "Mr. Henderson," she chirped, her voice like honey. "Can I start you off with some of that Macallan you like? Or perhaps a glass of the vintage champagne?" The man laughed. A deep, easy sound. "The Macallan sounds perfect. Sarah, you always remember." "Of course, sir," she said, her eyes twinkling. She poured the drink with practiced grace, placed it on a linen napkin, and even added a small bowl of warmed nuts without him asking. It was a beautiful display of hospitality. Then, she moved the cart 6 inches to the left, to my side. The honey in her voice turned to ice. The porcelain smile shattered. She didn't look me in the eye. She looked at my shoulder. Her hands gripped tight on the handle of the cart. "Water," she snapped. It wasn't a question. It was a directive. I took a breath, trying to keep my voice as smooth as the silk tie around my neck. "Actually, I'd love a ginger ale with lime. Please. And if you have any of those warmed nuts, I'd appreciate it. I skipped breakfast this morning." She didn't move. She didn't reach for a glass. She just stared at the wall behind my head. "We're saving the snacks for the full meal service," she said, her voice flat and brittle. "And I'm out of ginger ale. I can give you tap water or nothing." I looked at the cart. I could see the green cans of ginger ale sitting right there, tucked behind the club soda. I could see the silver tins of nuts sitting in the warming drawer. My heart did a slow, painful roll in my chest. It was such a small thing. Right. A soda. A snack. But it wasn't about the soda. It was about the fact that she was willing to lie to my face just to deny me a moment of comfort. "I can see the cans right there. Sarah," I said quietly. I used her name on purpose. I wanted her to know that I saw her as a person, even if she wouldn't do the same for me. She didn't flinch. She didn't even look embarrassed. She just shoved the cart forward, the metal wheel catching on the carpet with a harsh, grating sound. I said, "I'm out for this row." She spat, and then she kept moving, heading toward the back of the first-class cabin to serve the others. I sat there, parched, my throat feeling like it was filled with sand. I could hear the clinking of ice cubes in the rows behind me. I could smell the salt and the warmth of the nuts being served to everyone else. I felt like a ghost. I've spent millions of dollars with this airline over the years. I'm the guy they send thank you notes to. And yet, here I was, being treated like I'd snuck into a party I wasn't invited to. I tried to focus on my work again, but the letters on the screen were blurring. All I could think about was my father's shoes. How hard he worked to keep them shiny so no one could say he was lazy. How hard I'd worked to build this life so no one could say I didn't belong. And yet, the wall was still there. It didn't matter how much money I made or how many suits I bought. That wall was built into the minds of people like Sarah, and it was thicker than the hull of this airplane. About 45 minutes later, the smell of food began to waft through the cabin. It was the scent of searing meat, black pepper, and red wine reduction, the signature ribeye I hadn't eaten since dinner the night before, and the smell made my stomach ache. I watched Sarah come out with the menus, handing them out with a flourish. When she got to me, she didn't give me a menu. She didn't even stop. She just kept walking. I waited a minute, thinking maybe she'd forgotten. Maybe she was going in a specific order. But when I saw her taking orders from the couple in 3A and 3B, I realized I'd been skipped again. I pressed the attendant call button. It made a soft ding that felt like a scream in the quiet cabin. She took her time. She finished her conversation with the couple, laughed at something the husband said, and then slowly, painfully slowly, she walked toward the front. "Yes," she said, leaning over me. She was close enough that I could smell her perfume, something floral and expensive, but her eyes were as cold as a winter morning in Chicago. "I didn't receive a menu," I said, "and I'd like to order the ribeye." "Please." She let out a short, sharp puff of air, something between a sigh and a laugh. "Oh, we're out of the steak. Sir, the catering didn't load enough. You can have the cold pasta salad from the back, or you can wait until we land." "You're out?" I asked, my voice trembling just a little, not from fear, but from the sheer effort of holding back the roar of frustration building inside me. "You haven't even taken the orders for the first 2 rows yet." "I told you," she said, her voice rising just enough for the man in 1B to glance over. "We are out. I don't know what else to tell you. Do you want the salad or not?" I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the way her lip curled just a fraction of an inch. She wanted me to get angry. She wanted me to cause a scene. She wanted to prove that I was exactly what she thought I was. "No, thank you, Sarah," I said, my voice a whisper of steel. "I'll pass on the salad." She turned on her heel and disappeared into the galley. I sat there in the silence, the hunger in my stomach turning into a cold, hard knot of heart-ripping pain. It's a pain you can't describe to someone who hasn't felt it. The pain of being told your money is good, but your presence is a problem. 10 minutes later, I saw her come out of the galley. She was carrying a tray. On that tray was a plate with a thick, juicy ribeye, steam rising from it in curls of savory perfection. She walked right past my seat. She didn't go to the front. She went to row 2L, right behind me. The passenger in 2A was a young man who had boarded at the very last second. I'd seen him run onto the plane. He wasn't even on the original manifest when I looked earlier. "Here you go, Mr. Lawrence," Sarah said, her voice back to that honey-sweet tone. "One signature ribeye, medium rare, just the way you like it. I made sure to save the best cut for you." The smell of the meat hit me, so close I could almost taste it. The black pepper, the garlic, the rich fat. I heard the clink of the silver knife against the china plate. I heard the man thank her. I felt the blood drain from my face. It was a lie. A blatant, ugly, unnecessary lie. She hadn't run out of food. She had just decided, in her own mind, that I wasn't worthy of it. I sat there, staring at the seat back in front of me, the digital screen showing our progress across the map of the United States. We were somewhere over the Midwest, 30,000 feet in the air, but I had never felt more grounded in the harsh reality of my life. I looked down at my father's briefcase. The leather seemed darker in the dim light of the cabin. I reached down and touched the scuffed corner of it, my thumb rubbing the worn material. I could almost feel my father's hand on mine. Dignity. Son, don't let them take your dignity. But as the smell of that steak filled my lungs and the sound of Sarah's laughter echoed from the back of the cabin. I felt something shift inside me. The patience I'd cultivated for 50 years. The twice-as-good mantra that had guided every step of my career. It started to fray. I wasn't going to be a ghost anymore. I wasn't going to sit in 1A and pretend that this was okay. I reached for my phone, my fingers steady even though my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I didn't turn on the screen. I just held it. The dark glass reflecting my own eyes back at me. Eyes that were tired of the game. Eyes that were finally ready to look back. I slowly unbuckled my seatbelt, the metallic clink echoing in the small space. And I stood up. I didn't head for the restroom. I didn't head for the exit. I turned toward the galley where the light was bright and the curtain was half drawn. My shadow stretching long and dark across the carpeted aisle as I took that first, heavy step toward the confrontation I could no longer avoid. The carpet under my feet felt like it was miles thick, every step echoing in my head even though the cabin was hushed. It's a strange thing, moving through a space where you know you aren't wanted. The air feels heavier, like you're wading through water, trying to reach a shore that keeps moving further away. I felt the eyes of the other passengers on me, some curious, some indifferent, some looking away as if my presence were a stain on their pristine flight. I didn't look at them. I kept my gaze fixed on that half-drawn curtain at the front of the plane, the boundary between the service area and the sanctuary of the elite. As I reached the galley, the brightness of the fluorescent lights hit me. It was a sharp contrast to the dim, moody lighting of the main cabin. Everything was stainless steel and plastic, clinical and cold. Sarah was there, her back to me, fiddling with a drawer of miniature liquor bottles. The sound of the glass clinking was like tiny hammers hitting an anvil. She knew I was there. I could see it in the way her shoulders tensed, the way she suddenly became hyper-focused on those little bottles of gin and vodka. I stood there for a heartbeat, just letting my presence fill the small space. In my world, in the boardrooms where the air is thin and the stakes are high, silence is a weapon. If you can't control the room with your words, you control it with your stillness. I waited until the silence became so loud she couldn't ignore it anymore. She finally turned around. She didn't look surprised. She looked annoyed, like a gardener finding a weed in a prize-winning flower bed. She didn't offer a smile this time, not even the fake porcelain one. She just leaned against the counter and crossed her arms. "Can I help you with something?" "Sir?" she asked. The sir was a formality, stripped of any real respect. It sounded more like a challenge. I kept my hands at my sides, relaxed but ready. "I think we need to have a conversation." "Sarah," I said. My voice was low, the kind of tone I use when a deal is about to go south, and I need everyone to realize who's in charge. I've been sitting in 1A for over an hour. I've been skipped for drinks. I've been lied to about the meal service. And I've watched you treat every other person in this cabin with a level of care that you've specifically denied me. I want to know why." She didn't blink. She didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. Instead, she let out a short, dry laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "I already told you. We ran out of the ribeye. It's first come, first served. And as for the drinks, I'm only one person. I have a whole cabin to look after. If you're feeling neglected, maybe you're just being a bit too sensitive." Sensitive. I repeated the word, letting it hang in the air between us. Is that what we're calling it? Now, when I see you hand a steak to a passenger who boarded after me, 3 minutes after telling me you were out, when you forget to offer me water while you're topping off champagne in 1B, that's not sensitivity. Sarah, that's a pattern, and we both know what that pattern is built on. Her face shifted then, The arrogance hardened into something uglier, something sharper. She stepped closer, moving into my personal space, trying to use her position to intimidate me. But I'm a man who stood his ground against predatory lenders and cutthroat competitors. A flight attendant with a grudge wasn't going to make me flinch. "Listen," she whispered, her voice dropping so the passengers wouldn't hear. But the venom was unmistakable. "I don't know who you think you are or what kind of games you're trying to play, but this isn't the place. You're making people uncomfortable. You're standing in the galley, blocking the way, and you're being aggressive." I haven't raised my voice once, I said, my heart starting to thud with that heart-ripping pain of being gaslit in broad daylight. "I'm asking for the service I paid for. I'm asking to be treated like a human being." She leaned in even further, her eyes narrow slits of blue ice. "Maybe you'd be more comfortable with the snacks they're serving in the back," she said, her voice dripping with a casual, devastating cruelty. "This cabin is for a certain type of traveler. People who understand how things work. People who fit in. If you want to make a scene, I can have the captain call ahead and have you met by security when we land. Is that what you want?" The words hit me like a physical punch to the gut. A certain type of traveler. Fit in. It was the invisible wall, finally made vocal. It was the colored's only signs of my father's youth. Dressed up in a designer uniform and a frequent flyer program, the room seemed to tilt for a second. I felt a surge of heat, that raw, primal anger that tells you to roar, to flip the cart, to show her exactly how aggressive I could be. But then, I saw her eyes. She was waiting for it. She was practically begging for me to lose my cool. She wanted the angry black man show. She wanted to be the victim in this story. She wanted to be the one who feared for her safety, so she could justify every ugly thought she'd had about me since I stepped onto the plane. I took a deep breath. The cold, recycled air filling my lungs. I thought about my father's briefcase sitting under my seat. I thought about my daughters, who I was trying to build a world for, where they wouldn't have to stand in a galley and beg for a ginger ale. I realized that my anger was exactly what she wanted, and I wasn't going to give it to her. I wasn't going to let her win by becoming the caricature she had already drawn in her head. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I didn't say a word. I just tapped the camera icon and hit record. Her eyes widened. The arrogance flickered, just for a second, replaced by a flash of genuine fear. "What are you doing? You can't record me. That's against company policy." "Actually," I said, my voice as calm as a mirror-still pond, "I'm recording this interaction for my own records. Since you've threatened to involve security, I want to make sure there's an accurate account of what's being said. Now, would you mind repeating what you just said about the certain type of traveler who belongs in this cabin?" She went pale. She tried to reach for the phone, but I moved it just out of her reach, keeping the lens leveled right at her face. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't shouting. I was just documenting the truth. "I didn't say that," she stammered, her voice suddenly high and thin. "You're taking things out of context. Put that away. I'm still waiting for your name." "Two," I said. I looked at her lapel, but she had turned her name tag around so it was blank. "Why is your tag flipped over?" "Sarah, if you're so confident in the service you're providing, why are you hiding your identity?" She didn't answer. She backed away, hitting the counter behind her. The clinking bottles fell silent. In the cabin, I could feel the change in the atmosphere. The man in 1B had stopped reading his paper. The couple in the third row had stopped talking. The silence was absolute. A heavy, suffocating blanket that had settled over the entire first-class section. Everyone was watching now. The mask was off, and the ugliness was right there for everyone to see. I didn't say another word. I didn't need to. I just kept the camera rolling, capturing the way she wouldn't look at me, the way her hands were shaking as she tried to rearrange the napkin she'd already fixed. I held the phone steady, a silent witness to a moment that had been happening to people like me for 400 years. Only this time, I had the receipt. I felt a strange kind of peace settle over me. The heart-ripping pain was still there, but it was being replaced by a cold, hard clarity. I wasn't just a passenger anymore. I was a man standing in his own truth, refusing to be pushed into the shadows. I looked at her one last time, not with anger, but with a profound, weary pity. She was so trapped in her own small-mindedness that she couldn't see the man standing right in front of her. I slowly lowered the phone, but I didn't stop the recording. I turned my back on the galley and began the long walk back to seat 1. ER. Every step felt lighter now, like I was shedding the weight of her expectations. I could feel the stares of the other passengers, but this time, they didn't feel like a burden. They felt like witnesses. I reached my seat and sat down, the leather creaking under my weight. I didn't look at the screen. I didn't check the footage. I just sat there, staring out the window at the endless expanse of clouds, my hand resting firmly on the handle of my father's briefcase, feeling the vibration of the plane through the floor as the minutes ticked toward our descent. The pressure in my ears shifted as the nose of the aircraft tilted toward the gray horizon of the Atlantic coastline. That familiar, heavy silence of a cabin in descent took over. Only this time, it felt like the air was charged with static. I didn't look at Sarah when she walked by to do her final safety checks. I didn't need to. I could feel her presence like a cold draft. She was different now, moving faster, her eyes darting toward my seat every time she passed. Her professional mask looking more like a cracked shell. She was wondering. She was questioning if that 10-second clip on my phone was just a bluff, or if she had actually just handed me the keys to her career. I kept my hand on that old, scuffed briefcase. The leather felt warm under my palm. I thought about the merger waiting for me in Manhattan. I thought about the room full of suits who were expecting a shark. A man who could command a billion-dollar room without breaking a sweat. They wouldn't see the man who had just spent 6 hours being treated like a trespasser in his own seat. That's the thing about success in my world. You learn to wear the suit so well that nobody sees the bruises underneath. But as the wheels locked into place with a mechanical thud beneath us, I realized I wasn't going to just walk away and bury this one. Not this time. The touchdown at JFK was hard. The kind of landing that rattles your teeth and reminds you exactly how much weight is being carried by those wings. We taxied for what felt like an eternity, the lights of the terminal blurring past the window in long, yellow streaks. I watched the other first-class passengers start to gather their things, reaching for their designer carry-ons, their minds already on their Ubers and their dinner reservations. They were moving back into a world where they belonged. I was moving into a moment of truth. When the jet bridge finally connected and the chimes sounded for us to deplane, I didn't rush. I stood up, straightened my suit jacket, and gripped the handle of my father's bag. Sarah was standing at the door, her hands folded in front of her, trying to regain that "thank you for flying with us" posture. Her eyes met mine for a split second, and I saw it, a flicker of genuine, raw panic. She looked at my phone, tucked into my breast pocket, and for a moment, she looked like she wanted to say something. An apology. A plea. It didn't matter. The time for words had passed somewhere over the cornfields of Nebraska. I walked out of that plane and into the jet bridge, the air suddenly thick and smelling of jet fuel and New York humidity. At the end of the tunnel, standing right by the gate, I saw exactly what I expected. There were 3 people in high-visibility vests and navy blue blazers. One of them was a man I'd known for 7 years, Marcus. He was the ground operations manager for the entire terminal, a man who had helped my logistics company navigate some of the most complex supply chain issues in the Northeast. When Marcus saw me, his face lit up, but then he noticed my expression. He's a guy who reads people for a living. He knew something was wrong before I even got within 20 feet. Sarah was trailing a few steps behind me, likely coming off the plane to report the difficult passenger she had threatened to have arrested. "Robert," Marcus said, stepping forward, his hand extended. "Good to see you. Man, I saw your tail number on the manifest and figured I'd come down to say hello. Everything okay? You look like you just went 12 rounds with a heavyweight." I shook his hand, but I didn't let go of the gravity of the moment. I could hear Sarah's footsteps stop abruptly behind me. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head as she realized the aggressive man in 1A wasn't just a random traveler. He was a man the regional manager greeted by his first name. It was a long flight. "Marcus," I said, my voice steady, projecting just enough for the crew behind me to hear every syllable. A very long flight. We had some service issues that go a bit deeper than a cold meal. I pulled out my phone. I didn't even have to say much. I just played the clip, the part where she leaned in and told me this cabin was for a certain type of traveler, the part where her name tag was flipped, the part where the disdain in her voice was so sharp it could have cut glass. Marcus watched it. His jaw tightened. He didn't look at me. He looked past my shoulder at the crew standing in the doorway of the aircraft. The silence at the gate was absolute. The passengers who were rushing past us slowed down, sensing the shift in power. "Is this the lead for this flight?" Marcus asked, his voice dropping into that dangerous, quiet register that means someone's professional life is about to change forever. "That's her," I said. I didn't stay for the shouting. I'm not a man who finds joy in watching someone lose their livelihood, even when they've earned it. I watched Marcus signal for a supervisor and the onboard crew lead. I saw Sarah's face go from pale to a ghostly white as she was pulled aside, away from the prying eyes of the public. There wouldn't be a scene on the evening news. There wouldn't be a viral video of me screaming. There would just be a quiet, corporate reckoning, because when you've built something as big as I have, you realize that the most powerful thing you can do is hold up a mirror to someone's ugliness and let them deal with the reflection. As I walked through the terminal toward the car that was waiting for me, I felt the tension finally start to drain out of my shoulders. But it was replaced by a familiar, dull ache. I thought about how many people don't have a Marcus waiting for them at the gate. How many people endure that invisible wall every day in grocery stores, in doctors' offices, in job interviews, and they don't have a video or a billion-dollar company to back them up. They just have to swallow the heart-ripping pain and keep moving. I got into the back of the black sedan and leaned my head against the cool leather of the seat. The driver started the engine, and we pulled away from the curb, merging into the chaotic, beautiful mess of New York City. I looked at my father's briefcase sitting next to me. I realized that the success I had chased my whole life wasn't about the Italian suits or the first-class seats. It was about the ability to demand the dignity that my father was never allowed to ask for. It was about making sure that the next man who sits in one aisle doesn't have to wonder if he's invisible. Listen, I'm telling you this story because I want you to understand something. Success doesn't protect you from the world's smallness, but it gives you a platform to challenge it. Don't ever let someone else's narrow mind define the space you're allowed to occupy. You belong in every room you walk into. You belong in every seat you pay for. And you sure as hell belong at the top of whatever mountain you're climbing. We're at the end of this journey today, but the conversation is just beginning. If you've stayed with me through all of this, if you felt even a fraction of what I felt at 30,000 feet, I want you to do something for me. I want you to go down to the comments right now and type the word dignity. Let's fill that section with a reminder of what we all deserve. And if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button and share this with someone who needs to hear that they aren't alone in the struggle. You know, after that flight, after I sat in that black car and watched the Manhattan skyline crawl past the window, I couldn't stop looking at that old briefcase. You guys saw it in the last video. The scuffed corners, the brass that's lost its shine, the handle that fits my grip like it was molded by my own DNA. A lot of you asked me, Robert, why carry that old thing into a billion-dollar merger? Why not get something that matches the suit? And I get it. In a world that judges you by the brand on your wrist or the logo on your bag, carrying a relic like this is a choice. But that bag isn't just leather and thread. It's a ghost. It's a reminder of a day 40 years ago that shaped the man who sat in seat 124. Before I get into this, I want to ask you something. Have you ever had a North Star in your life? A person or a moment that you look back on when the world gets too loud or too cold? Tell me about your North Star in the comments. I want to hear who kept you grounded when you were ready to drift away. And if you're finding value in these stories, make sure you're subscribed. We're digging deep today. Let's go back to 1986. I was just a kid, maybe 12 years old. My father, a man who gave 40 years of his life to a steel mill, had saved up every extra penny for 3 years. He didn't want a new car or a fancy watch. He wanted to take my mother to the finest restaurant in the city for their 20th anniversary. He wanted, just for one night, to step out of the grease and the soot and into a world of white tablecloths and soft music. I remember watching him get ready. He'd spent a week polishing his shoes until they looked like black glass. He'd pressed his only suit, a heavy, charcoal wool thing that smelled like mothballs and dignity, and he was carrying that briefcase. Back then, it was new. The leather was stiff and smelled like a rich man's library. He'd bought it at a thrift shop, but he treated it like it held the secrets to the universe. He told me, Robert, a man's business is his bond, and his tools tell you how much he respects his work. We drove into the city in our old, beat-up Chevy. My father was nervous. I could see it in the way he gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles ashen. We parked 3 blocks away because he didn't want the valet to see the rust on the fenders. I walked with them to the front of this massive, gold-trimmed restaurant. I was just a kid in a clip-on tie, but I felt like royalty just standing next to him. But when we got to the mahogany doors, the world changed. The maitre d' didn't even let us inside. He stepped out onto the sidewalk, blocking the entrance with a body that was as stiff as a board. He looked at my father's suit. He looked at our old car idling at the light down the street. And then he looked at that briefcase. "Can I help you?" he asked. It was the same tone Sarah used on the plane. That polite, sharp-edged sir that feels like a slap. My father cleared his throat. "I have a reservation. For 2. It's our anniversary." The man didn't even check the book. He just shook his head. "I think you have the wrong address. Our reservations are booked 6 months in advance, and we have a very strict dress code. This isn't a place for casual visitors." My father didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He just stood there, his back as straight as a steel beam, holding that briefcase against his side. I saw his hand tremble, just a tiny bit, but his face was a mask of granite. He looked that man in the eye, really looked at him, and said, "I understand. Thank you for your time." We walked back to the car in total silence. My mother was crying quietly, her head turned toward the window. My father didn't say a word until we were halfway home. He pulled over to the side of the road, gripped that briefcase until his knuckles turned white, and looked at me in the rearview mirror. "Robert?" he said, his voice thick with a heart-ripping pain I'll never forget. "They can keep the table, they can keep the steak, but don't you ever let them keep your pride. You carry yourself like you own the ground you walk on. Because you do. You hear me?" I didn't realize it then, but that briefcase became my inheritance. When he passed away, it was the only thing I asked for. I didn't want the house or the little bit of money he'd left behind. I wanted the leather that had absorbed his sweat and his silent endurance. So, 40 years later, when Sarah looked at me in seat 1A like I was a mistake on her manifest, I wasn't just Robert the CEO. I was that 12-year-old boy again. And she wasn't just a flight attendant. She was the ghost of that maître d' standing on a sidewalk in 1986. The reason I didn't explode on that plane, the reason I kept my boardroom voice and my calm demeanor, was because of the man who held this bag before me. I realized that if I let her get to me, if I became the angry man she wanted, I was betraying my father's legacy. He taught me that silence isn't a lack of power. It's the ultimate form of it. It's the silence of a lion before he strikes. Carrying this bag into a billion-dollar merger isn't a fashion statement. It's a reminder that no matter how high I climb, I carry the struggles of the people who came before me. Every scratch on this leather is a story of survival. Every worn-out stitch is a testament to the fact that we belong in the room, even if we have to build the room ourselves. When I finally reached the hotel after that flight, I didn't call my lawyers first. I didn't check the news. I sat on the edge of the bed in that $5,000 a night suite, and I put the briefcase on the table in front of me. I ran my fingers over the handle, feeling the warmth of the wood and the soul of the man who had taught me how to be a king even when the world treats you like a servant. I realized then that the invisible wall doesn't just exist on airplanes. It exists in the mind, and the only way to tear it down is to refuse to acknowledge its power. Sarah thought she was denying me a meal. I knew she was just testing my foundation. And thanks to my father, my foundation was made of something much stronger than her prejudice. So, next time you see someone carrying something old, or wearing something that doesn't fit the profile, take a second look. You don't know the ghosts they're carrying. You don't know the battles they've already won just to be standing in front of you. I'm going to leave you with this. Your history isn't a burden. It's your fuel. Use it. I'll see you in the next one. Peace. 2 hours. That's all the time I had between the moment I stepped off that plane at JFK and the moment I had to walk into a glass-walled boardroom on the 50th floor of a midtown skyscraper. My stomach was a hollow cavern, still aching from the signature ribeye I never got to eat. My head was pounding with the rhythm of Sarah's voice, and my spirit felt like it had been dragged through a gravel pit. You guys ever had to perform when you were at your absolute lowest? When your mind is miles away, stuck on a hurt that nobody else can see? Drop a comment and tell me how you pushed through. I need to know your secrets. Because that afternoon, I was running on nothing but pure, unadulterated will. If you're feeling the weight today, hit that like button. Let's carry it together. I walked into the lobby of the building. It was one of those places where the marble is so polished, you can see your own soul in the floor. Security was tight. I checked in, the young man at the desk giving me a quick, Professional nod. He didn't ask for 2 forms of ID. He didn't hold my license up to the light. He just saw a man in a suit who looked like he belonged there. The contrast between the street and the sky was already starting to mess with my head. I got into the elevator. It was one of those high-speed ones that makes your stomach drop as you rocket upward. I looked at my reflection in the mirrored doors. My eyes were bloodshot. There was a tightness in my jaw that I couldn't seem to shake. I looked like a man who had been through a war, even though the only weapons used against me were words and cold stares. The doors opened, and I was met by my lead counsel, David. He's a sharp guy. Yale Law. Been with me for a decade. He took one look at me, and his eyebrows shot up. Robert, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost, David whispered as we walked toward the conference room. I have, David, I said, my voice sounding like it was coming from the bottom of a well. I've seen a lot of them today. Well, pull it together. Man, the board is restless. They heard about the delay at LAX, and some of the investors are getting cold feet. They need to see the closer today, not a ghost. I nodded, gripping my father's briefcase. The weight of it was the only thing keeping me from floating away. I pushed open the double doors and stepped into the room. The air was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and lukewarm coffee. There were 12 men and women sitting around a table that cost more than my first house. Most of them were white, middle-aged, and looked like they'd never missed a meal in their lives. They looked at me as I entered, and for a split second, I saw it again. That "who are you?" flicker. It was subtle, much more refined than Sarah's blatant disrespect. But it was there. It's the boardroom ghost. The quiet assumption that maybe you're just a lucky anomaly, not a permanent fixture. I sat down at the head of the table. I didn't apologize for being late. I didn't mention the flight. I just opened the briefcase. But as I pulled out the contracts, my hand shook. Just a tiny bit. I could feel the hunger in my stomach turning into a wave of nausea. All I could see was that ribeye being served to the man in 2A. All I could feel was the heart-ripping pain of being told I didn't fit the profile. I stumbled over my first few sentences. My voice lacked its usual resonance. I saw one of the lead investors, a guy named Sterling, lean back and check his watch. He gave a small, dismissive smirk to the person sitting next to him. "Is there a problem, Robert?" Sterling asked, his voice dripping with that patronizing concern. "If you're not feeling up to the presentation, we can always reschedule. We know how taxing these long trips can be for some people." The room went cold. It was the certain type of traveler comment all over again. Just dressed up in corporate jargon. He was questioning my stamina. He was questioning my right to be in that chair. I looked down at the table. I saw my hands, the dark, weathered hands that had built an empire, resting on the edge of my father's briefcase. And in that moment, I felt a surge of something hot and bright. It wasn't the anger I'd felt on the plane. It was clarity. I realized that Sarah hadn't just been a flight attendant. She had been a training exercise. The flight was the warm-up. The boardroom was the championship. If I could handle a 30,000-foot assault on my dignity, I could damn sure handle a billionaire in a midtown office. I stood up. I didn't look at my notes. I didn't look at the screen. I walked over to the window and looked out at the city spread out below us. "You know," I started, my voice finally finding its base. "I spent 6 hours today being told I didn't belong in a seat I paid for. I spent 6 hours being treated like a ghost in a cabin I've flown in 1,000 times. And for a minute, I almost believed it. I almost let that small-mindedness follow me into this room." I turned back to the table. Sterling's smirk had vanished. The rest of the board was leaning in. the tension in the room shifting like a tectonic plate. But then I remembered something, I said, placing my hand firmly on my briefcase. This bag has been through worse than a rude flight attendant. The man who carried it before me endured things that would make every one of you crumble. He taught me that your value isn't something someone else gives you. It's something you bring with you. Now, I'm not here to ask for your permission to close this deal. I'm here to show you why it's the best decision you'll ever make. Because if I can maintain my integrity while being treated like a second-class citizen at 30,000 feet, imagine what I can do for your logistics when the world is actually falling apart. For the next 45 minutes, I didn't just present a merger. I conducted a symphony. I broke down the numbers. I mapped out the growth. And I addressed every concern with a precision that was surgical. I wasn't the aggressive man Sarah feared. I was the unstoppable force my father raised. When I finished, the silence in the room was different. It wasn't the heavy, judgmental silence of the plane. It was the silence of respect. Sterling was the first to stand up. He didn't smirk this time. He walked around the table and held out his hand. Robert, I apologize. I think I misjudged the man I was dealing with. I took his hand. I didn't squeeze too hard, but I didn't let go quickly either. It happens. Sterling. People often see the suit before they see the man. Just make sure it doesn't happen again. The deal was signed 20 minutes later, as I walked out of that building and back into the New York night. I felt a strange sense of gratitude for Sarah. She had tried to dim my light, but all she'd done was force me to turn it up. She had tried to starve me, but she only made me hungrier for the win. I finally walked into a little hole-in-the-wall diner near my hotel. It wasn't first class. There were no white tablecloths, but the waitress, a woman with tired eyes and a kind smile, brought me a burger and a ginger ale without me having to ask twice. You look like you've had a day. Honey, she said, setting the plate down. You have no idea. I laughed. I took a bite of that burger. And let me tell you, it tasted better than any ribeye ever could. It tasted like victory. It tasted like home. So, I'm going to end this where I started. The world is always going to try to tell you who you are. It's going to try to put you in a box and tape it shut. But you're the one with the scissors. You're the one who decides how much space you take up. Don't let the ghosts of other people's prejudice haunt your success. Walk into every room like you own it. Because you do. Type unstoppable in the comments if you're ready to take your seat at the table. I'm rooting for you. Peace.